Today, I wanted to talk about the future of planning. And yeah, speaking of COVID and the pandemic and the future of planning, I feel like right now, the future is really more unknowable than ever before. With the pandemic, there's so much uncertainty around us. And while we're trying to flatten the COVID-19 curve, I feel like there are many, many more other curves that we also have to flatten. And when we're looking at this graph here from the book, Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman, a very non-scientific graph, by the way, he's talking about, the acceleration of technological innovation, the rate of change in technology, and how hard it gets for us as human beings to really adapt to that pace of change that we're experiencing here. Now, I would argue it's not only technological change that we are experiencing and that's accelerating. These days, we're dealing with climate change, we're dealing with political shifts and political changes, political polarization because of these changes. We're dealing with societal change, changes in population, changes in the awareness of inequalities in our society, economic shifts and changes, and so on and so on. Now, why I'm saying all of this? Coming back to the future of planning, well, if we look at the definition of what planners do and what planning actually is, and I really like the Indiana Jones analogy that Luna brought up, but looking at these two definitions, the first one by Tim Keane, he's the planning director of the city of Atlanta, he said, planners help communities navigate change. And then on the bottom, we have Charlie Hoke. He's a professor at UIC in Chicago. He wrote the book, What Planners Do. And he said, planners compose and offer advice on preparing for an uncertain future. Now, looking at these two definitions, it seems like planners play a pretty important role when it comes to change and helping communities to handle change. That made us think at the American Planning Association. We are the professional association for all planners in the US and beyond. That made us think, well, what can we do to prepare planners for this task and to help planners navigate change and prepare for uncertainty? And so that's where we started APA Foresight last year. And we call it a process of learning with the future. And that's not a grammar mistake. It's really learning with the future, because we want to learn about the future while the future is approaching. And so that's really about developing a plan to learn about new things, and preparing for these things. And the ultimate goal is to give planners the guidance on these new things and what they can do to help their communities prepare for them. Now, what are we doing there? We're looking at 5 different trend categories. We look at societal trends, technological trends, economic trends, environmental trends, and political trends. And we try to connect these trends to cities and communities, so to the people that we serve, the systems around us, the built environment, you name it. And then also we're trying to connect it to the planning profession itself. So that means the planning approaches we use in our work, methodologies, processes, and also tools and skills planners need to do their work. And then again, we try to create guidance for planners so they can prepare for what's on the horizon. When we're doing that, we're looking at 3 different time frames. So on the bottom, you see those 3 time frames: act, prepare, and learn and watch. So that means we're looking at existing trends that we can already act on, that are critical for immediate decisions. We're looking at emerging trends, so trends that are not really trends yet, but are becoming trends, so we can prepare for them. And then we're looking at the so-called signals that give us hints about potential future trends. So that's what we need to learn and keep watching for now. Now, we ended up with a huge list of trends. We had about 100 trends in our first cycle of Foresight that we finalized this last spring. And I would obviously love to share all 100 trends with you, but I know we're running out of time. And also at APA, we had to figure out how can we prioritize, how can we make sure we address the ones that are most important for our members, for the planners in our work. And so we decided, okay, we have to prioritize and rate them. So we were looking at, from all of these trends, what are the things where planners are already prepared for, and what are the things that planners have no clue about? And then we also looked at what are the things that will most likely have high impacts in the future, and what are the things that are happening but are not as impactful. And then, of course, the trends that are low preparedness and high impact were the ones that we prioritized as most important. Now, that's also a long list, and I thought for today, I'm just going to pick 3 of them, and one for each of the 3 timeframes. I'm going to start with the ACT timeframe, so existing trends that we already need to take care of. And I picked this one because I feel like everyone is living it right now. And even the fact that I'm sitting here in Chicago, talking to you guys in Vienna, it's just a good trend to bring up as an example. So the digitalization of pretty much everything in life. And we're not just talking about Zoom meetings and online conferences or remote work. It really spans the full spectrum from e-commerce, esports, online education, virtual entertainment, you name it. And while this has been a trend for about 2 decades, the COVID-19 pandemic really accelerated it. And so when we're connecting this trend to planning, of course, planners also work remotely, and planners need to do online meetings when they're doing their community engagement. But there's so many more impacts when you look at land use and transportation planning, because if everyone lives, works, and plays and studies in one place, which is home, that has an impact on our transportation behavior, on our daily commutes that we suddenly don't have anymore, and all the needs of things that we have in our neighborhoods where we live. What used to be residential neighborhoods now need multiple functions. You want to be able to do your groceries here. You want to be able to go to your gym and your lunch break, maybe. You want to be able to meet your friends after work. All of the things that used to happen in the city center or in downtown or the central business district are happening now in previously residential areas. And going further with this, we really have to ask ourselves, will location still matter? Because these days, access to internet is access to jobs, education, to goods and services, and to entertainment. And so what will be the thing that will bring people to cities? What will be the reason for people to still move to cities when it used to be the jobs, the entertainment, the goods, and the services? And then, of course, another planning-related issue here is digital inclusion. Not everyone has internet. Not everyone has high-quality internet. And not everyone understands how to use a computer or how to connect to the internet. For example, last year during the lockdown, my grandma, she lives by herself. She didn't know how to use FaceTime. She didn't know how to use Zoom. So my phone bill went really up last year. Now moving to the next time frame, the prepare time frame. And I picked artificial intelligence for this one. It's really said to be the biggest disruptor of all times. And while we've been working on developing artificial intelligence since the 1950s, the last 2 decades really spurred a development here like never before. And this market is growing. And that's mainly because suddenly we were dealing with big data sets that no one knows how to deal with anymore. And we have increased computing power that allows us to actually develop things like artificial intelligence. Now, will it be taking over everything? We don't know, as Runa already said, but there are chances that some things in our lives and also in our professional lives as planners will change. So we can expect that there will be new planning tools and new processes coming out of this new technology. Runa also mentioned the digital twins. Obviously, that will need some sort of artificial intelligence to help automate processes. But then there's always this big question of what's the human factor of planning and what makes a planner and not a machine. And while there is a lot of decision making based on data and rationality that might be replaced by AI, that might be automated, there are a lot of things that planners do that can't be automated and that probably won't be able to be done by a machine. And the really important thing is here, when we look at planning ethics and equitable deployment of AI tools, the machine only takes the data that it gets, but no one asks where it's coming from. And that's really where the planner comes in, because planners need to know their communities, planners need to know where the data comes in, and planners also need to know who's not represented in that data. What are the data gaps? Similar with the algorithms that we use, who wrote it and how biased were they? Now, there's a lot to say about new skills planners will probably have to learn to be able to actually collaborate with AI instead of being replaced by it. And then obviously we need policies and regulations to make the deployment of AI really equitable and sustainable. So a lot of things to prepare for planners here. And then the last trend that I want to bring up from the third time frame, the watch and learn time frame, is 3D printing. When I brought up 3D printing with my colleagues, they were looking at me like, are you going completely crazy now? Why are we talking about 3D printing? And so we were looking at that, and there are a lot of very directly connected things with 3D printing and planning. Now that this technology is really developing and is becoming more and more sophisticated, now we can mix different materials in one 3D print. That allows us to actually 3D print houses. And a couple of weeks ago, the first 3D printed pedestrian bridge was installed in Amsterdam. And now the question is, obviously, we're living through a housing crisis. There's not enough affordable housing. So is that a solution to that? Because you can 3D print a house for half the price and a third of the time that you would usually need for a regular house. But that's not where that story stops. Because if we are thinking, if we can 3D print everything, what will be the future of retail? How will that disrupt supply chains? Will we in the future just go online, we buy an idea or the design of a product, and then we have it printed in our local print store? Is that the future of retail? Just a bunch of 3D print stores next to each other? It will spur the local economy because you will use local materials, you will use local printers, but what is that going to do to retail? So that's just a quick view of our trends that we are looking at. And in the end, the important thing here is really, as planners, we shape the future of communities. But if we want to shape the future of communities, we really need to be able to imagine it. We need to be able to create these thoughts and ideas. And as Runa said, not all of that might be really happening. We don't know, but we need to prepare for it. We need to create these different scenarios as planners, thinking it could happen. We don't know if it will, but we want to be ready if it happens. And so from our list of 100 different trends, we also looked at some bigger picture developments, and so what we call trend patterns. And some of these trend patterns gave us some additional ideas of how the planning profession needs to change in the future and what planning should be about. And I picked 3 of those that I want to share with you. So the first trend pattern is something that I already mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the acceleration of change. The pace of change is accelerating, and with that, we are experiencing more and more disruptions. Obviously, COVID-19 was a big disruption, but AI is also a big disruption, and many other things are big disruptions. Now, as planners, we like to plan for the next 10, 20 years of our communities, of our cities, but do we really include all of the things that might be happening in the future? We don't. We start preparing a plan for the next 10 years, a Stadtentwicklungsplan or a comprehensive plan, without really thinking about all the things around us that might be changing over time. So planners need to become more future literate, and planning processes need to become more agile so we can actually adjust along the way. Even though we may want to have a 10-year long-range plan, but we want to be able to make changes to that plan along the way while the future is approaching. Obviously, policies are the same thing. We need to have the policies ready and not then just try to figure out how to correct mistakes that we made because we didn't have the right policies in place. The second pattern that I want to share is related to repeating past mistakes from the analog world in a digitalized world. And what I want to say with that is that I think that while planning is people-centric, and that's a good thing, we love our Indiana Jones planners, but I think it really should become a mix of matrix and the English patient, because we need both. Planners need to learn about and understand the technologies that we will be using in the future, because otherwise we're gonna be irrelevant. If we don't understand how autonomous vehicles work, but we wanna plan for a city like Vienna, that's not gonna play out well. So planning really needs to stay people-centric, but we also need to be technologically advanced and knowledgeable about technologies around us because they impact our communities, and we need to be aware of that. And then the third one, some emerging trends can really seem irrelevant, and when we look at them in isolation. But what we need to do in planning is really think outside the box and do more systems thinking, because a lot of things in our systems around us are connected with each other. And my favorite example here actually is when we look back in 2005, no one would have thought that a telephone will change the way how we move around town, how we collect data, and how we do pretty much everything in life. And then the iPhone was invented. No one saw that coming. But if we had learned about what's going on in that sector, we might have been prepared for things like Uber and Lyft that disrupted cities across the world and resulted in conflicts with private sector companies that just didn't have the policies in place to actually get their business going. And with that, I thank you all for your attention. And I wanted to share our website on planning.org/foresight. If you're interested in learning more about what we're doing, if you want to read some products on urban air mobility, artificial intelligence, climate migration, and other future-focused topics, feel free to visit our website or also shoot me an email. My email address is up here too. Thank you.